Silence swallowed the underground poker room like a held breath before a gunshot. Emma screamed. 7 years old, a torn pink dress hanging off one small shoulder, blood smeared across her left sleeve. She ran. Her bare feet slapped against the polished concrete floor between green felt tables stacked with $100 bills, past cigar smoke hanging thick as fog, past 30 men in custom suits who froze mid-motion like puppets with their strings cut. The child's voice cracked the air like a blade through glass. Aria did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up. The maid in the black and white uniform, invisible in that room for 3 years, stood from the corner where she had been clearing empty glasses. She dropped the serving tray. It clattered against the floor, coins of sound scattering across concrete. Nobody looked at her. Nobody ever looked at her. But when Emma crashed into her legs, sobbing so hard her entire frame shook like a leaf in wind, Aria fell to her knees and pulled the child against her chest. Blood. On Emma's arm. Not much, but enough. Aria's hands moved with the precision of someone who had tended wounds before, who understood pain from the inside out. She wiped the blood away with her apron, her fingers gentle, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "You are safe now. You are safe with me." Emma was blind. Aria knew this. Everyone in the mansion knew this. Sophie Langford's younger sister, the one nobody spoke about, the one kept upstairs in quiet rooms. But Emma was not alone now. Aria's body became a shield. She did not care that 30 armed men watched. She did not care that the music had stopped, that the poker chips had gone silent, that breathing itself seemed to have paused in that underground space. From the shadows near the back wall, a man stepped forward. Luca Valenti. Seattle's most feared Mafia boss. 38 years old with storm grey eyes that had seen his own brother betray the entire family 3 hours earlier, had seen loyalty shatter like bone. He stood 6'2", his shoulders broad beneath a tailored black suit that cost more than most people's annual salary. A scar ran from the edge of his right eye to his cheekbone, silver in the fluorescent light. His watch, 18-karat gold, a Patek Philippe, caught the glow as he moved forward. He did not speak. He watched the maid shield his niece. He watched her wipe blood from the child's face like the child was hers. He watched her rock Emma back and forth, and whisper words he could not hear but somehow understood. In 15 years of ruling this city, in 15 years of watching men kill each other over debts and disrespect, he had never seen a gesture like this. Not in his circle. Not in his world. Bruno stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. Luca raised one hand. "Stop." Sal, the other lieutenant, exchanged a look with Bruno. A single glance that meant they both understood something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, though neither could name what it was. Emma stopped crying. She reached up and touched Aria's face, her small fingers mapping the maid's cheek, her jaw, her neck. Seeking reassurance through touch because her eyes could not see. "The bad men," Emma whispered. "They hurt my sister." "Why do they hurt her?" Aria did not answer. Some questions have no good answers. Instead, she held the child closer and stood, still shielding Emma with her body even though the danger had passed, even though everyone in the room had frozen at Luca's command. Luca watched the maid's face. Really watched it. For the first time in 3 years, he truly saw her. Not as furniture. Not as part of the mansion's background like the paintings and the chandelier and the marble floors. He saw her tired eyes. He saw the way her uniform hung on her frame like she was slowly disappearing into the fabric itself. He saw something else too, something broken that mirrored his own fractured world, a jagged edge he recognized the way you recognize pain in another person's body because you carry the same pain. "Take her upstairs," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Do not let her out of your sight." Aria nodded. She did not question. She did not speak. She simply turned and carried Emma toward the stairs, one hand pressed against the child's back, her apron still stained with blood that was not her own. The moment they disappeared up the concrete steps, the room exhaled. Luca turned to Bruno and Sal. His jaw clenched. His eyes hardened. The brief moment of something almost soft vanished like morning fog burning away. "Find out who brought Emma down here," he said, his voice now carrying the edge of a threat. "And find out why she had blood on her. If anyone has hurt her." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Bruno and Sal moved immediately. The room resumed its breathing. The poker chips began moving again. The cigar smoke curled upward. But Luca remained still for several more seconds, staring at the empty stairs where the maid had disappeared, his mind circling back to the phone call from 3 hours ago, the news that his own brother had sold family secrets to the Russian syndicate, had traded their blood for money and protection. What he did not know in that moment was that the woman upstairs, the invisible maid in the black and white uniform, had been counting down the days to her own disappearance. That she carried a foreclosure notice in her pocket, creased and worn from handling, a document that promised her complete destruction in less than 14 days. That she had exactly $5 remaining to her name and no plan for survival beyond that thin edge of a deadline. What neither of them understood was that this moment, a child screaming, a maid moving without thinking, a powerful man watching from shadows, would set their entire lives on a collision course with fate. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. The twist ahead will break your heart. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us rewind 3 years earlier, to when Aria Reynolds first arrived at the Valenti mansion with nothing but $5 in her pocket and scars mapped across her back like a geography of pain she had never spoken aloud to anyone. The October rain fell cold and hard that night. The kind of rain that cuts through fabric, that finds its way into bones, that makes a person understand why some people do not survive the winter. Aria stood outside the mansion's service entrance, a single duffel bag at her feet, her entire life compressed into worn canvas and broken zippers. She had been hired by phone. No interview. No questions asked. The voice on the line had simply said, "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Service entrance. Bring nothing but yourself." Which meant someone had already decided she had nothing worth bringing. The rain soaked through her thin jacket. She was 22 years old but looked older. 30, maybe. Her dark hair hung in wet strands down her back. Her eyes were brown and hollow, the kind of hollow that comes from survival rather than sadness, from years of bracing for the next blow. She wore jeans with a hole in one knee and shoes held together with duct tape and prayer. $5 remained in her wallet. $5 was supposed to last until payday, which was 10 days away. She had done the math 17 times. $5 divided by 10 days meant she could eat approximately 50 cents per day if she kept herself alive on scraps. The mansion loomed above her. Brick and stone and ivy that had been climbing for decades. Lights glowed in windows she would never enter. She had already understood, before she even crossed the threshold, that this place would consume her, that she would become part of its infrastructure like the pipes and the wiring, essential but invisible. The back door opened. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, her face arranged into an expression of profound disinterest. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper. She wore her authority like armor, a starched gray dress with a name tag, iron-colored hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. "You are late," Mrs. Chen said. Not a question. An accusation. Aria looked at her phone. 5:59. 1 minute early. Come in. Do not drip on the carpet. The kitchen was warm. Aria's body began to shake, not from fear but from the sudden transition from freezing rain to heated air, from the shock of safety after standing in the cold. She dripped anyway, rain pooling at her feet, darkening the white tile floor. Mrs. Chen handed her a uniform. Black and white. The colors of invisible service. You will start at 6 in the morning and finish at 9 at night. You will clean, serve, and maintain. You will speak to no one in the family unless spoken to. You will use the service stairs. You will eat in the kitchen after everyone else has been fed. You will She paused. Her eyes, sharp as glass, scanned Aria from head to foot. You will cover any marks you have. Makeup, long sleeves, whatever is necessary. The family should not see damage. Aria did not respond. She understood, in that moment, that she had already been assessed and categorized. That Mrs. Chen had looked at her and seen exactly what she was, someone desperate enough to accept any terms, someone with no negotiating power, someone whose survival was contingent on absolute obedience. There is an attic room, Mrs. Chen continued. Rent is 300 per month, deducted from your pay. You will begin work tomorrow. 12-hour shift. The work is simple if you pay attention. Complicated if you do not. Aria changed into the uniform in a bathroom with a single flickering light. The uniform hung on her frame like she was already fading into the fabric. She caught her reflection in the mirror and did not recognize herself. When had her face become this sharp? When had her eyes become this empty? The attic room was small. A single bed with a white blanket. A desk with a lamp. A window that overlooked the rain-soaked garden. She lay down without eating, without changing, with the uniform still clinging to her damp skin, and listened to the rain on the roof above her head. 3 years she would spend in this house. 3 years of invisibility. 3 years of watching the Valenti family move through their lives like she was simply part of the architecture, part of the walls, part of the silence. She had no idea, as she drifted toward sleep, that in 3 years' time, a man would step out of shadow and truly see her for the first time. She had no idea that everything was about to change. 3 years earlier, Aria Reynolds stood in the marble foyer of the Valenti mansion with her hands folded in front of her body, making herself small. The black and white uniform hung on her frame like she was already fading into the fabric. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, had just finished explaining the rules with the precision of someone who had delivered the same speech 100 times to 100 invisible women. Your room is the attic, Mrs. Chen had said, not looking at her. 300 per month, deducted from your wages. You will begin work at 5 in the morning. You will finish when the work is complete. You will not speak to the family members unless spoken to. You will not eat in the main kitchen. You will not use the front staircase. You will cover any marks on your body. The family should not see damage. Aria had nodded. She understood the language of erasure. She had been learning it for 8 years. The attic room was small. A single bed with a white blanket pulled tight. A desk with a lamp that flickered when you turned it on. A window that overlooked the rain-soaked garden where the November cold pressed against the glass like a living thing. She lay down without eating, without changing clothes, still wearing the uniform damp from the rain outside, and listened to the sound of water dripping somewhere in the walls. The rain fell steadily, each drop marking time like a clock with no numbers. When morning came at 4:45 a.m., Aria was already awake. She had learned years ago that sleep was a luxury people without debts could afford. She washed her face in cold water, pulled her hair back tight against her skull, and made sure the collar of her uniform covered the edge of a scar that ran along the line of her shoulder blade. Another scar waited beneath her left sleeve. And another. And another. 8 years of them, mapped across her back like a geography of pain she had never spoken aloud to anyone because speaking aloud meant existing, and existing meant being noticed, and being noticed meant danger. The Valenti mansion revealed itself in sections as she moved through it with a cleaning cloth and bucket. The kitchen where she was not allowed to eat, despite the smell of fresh bread and espresso. The dining room where the polished table could fit 20 people but Luca Valenti sat alone most nights with reports spread in front of him and a glass of whiskey that he never finished. The hallways with their oil paintings of old men with hard eyes. The library where leather-bound books lined the walls and the smell of old paper hung thick in the silence. She was invisible in all of it. The other staff members looked through her, not at her. When they spoke around her as though she was made of air. This was the currency of safety. Invisibility meant you belonged nowhere and therefore threatened nothing. Invisibility meant you could move through rooms without consequence, could hear conversations meant to stay private, could exist in the margins where the light didn't quite reach. On her third week, Aria was cleaning the hallway outside Luca Valenti's office at 2 a.m. The mansion was still. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a cold silence that pressed against the windows. She was on her knees, scrubbing the baseboards, when she heard his voice from behind the office door. Raw. Stripped of whatever careful control he maintained during daylight. "Marco, you're my brother. How could you?" She pressed herself against the wall, bucket forgotten. The voice on the other end of the phone was too distant to hear, but Luca's response came through clear, like a knife cutting through air. 8 years. 8 years I trusted you with the northern distribution. 8 years, and you're moving product without my approval. Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand what happens now? Aria held her breath. She had heard enough in 3 weeks to know that she had just listened to something that could get her killed. She stood slowly, careful not to make a sound, and moved down the hallway with her bucket held in front of her like a shield. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She had learned long ago what it meant when powerful men made phone calls like that. It meant blood would follow. She didn't see the man who would change everything that night. She only heard his voice, raw with betrayal, and understood that she had glimpsed something behind the mask he wore during the day. The flashback came to her unbidden as she worked. 16 years old. A warehouse that smelled like rust and diesel fuel. Douglas Hale's hand gripping her arm, his voice like gravel scraping against concrete. "You'll work until the debt is paid, girl. Your mother borrowed $2,000. You think that's free money? You think there's no cost?" She had been young enough to believe him. Young enough to think the work would be simple, temporary, something she could endure for a few months and then walk away from. She hadn't understood that debt didn't work like that. Debt was a chain that lengthened every time you tried to break it. By age 20, the chain had wrapped around her so completely that she couldn't see any way out. Sophie Langford had appeared then, elegant and cruel, standing in Hale's office with her designer purse and her perfect manicure. "Keep her longer," she had said, handing him an envelope of cash. "She's useful. I need someone for the houses. Someone disposable who won't ask questions." Aria had understood in that moment that she wasn't a person with a future. She was a resource. An object to be traded and used until she broke, at which point another object would be found to replace her. She had escaped that situation 6 months later with a borrowed car and a prayer that Hale wouldn't find her. He had found her anyway, 3 months into hiding in Seattle, with a debt that had somehow grown to $5,000. Penalties, he explained. Interest, he explained. The cost of thinking you could run from your obligations. She had paid him $200 a month in cash, leaving her with almost nothing, living in rooms with other desperate women, working double shifts at diners where men would leave her bills with phone numbers written on them. And then Mrs. Chen had appeared. A job as a housemaid. $300 a month for a room. Steady work. Invisibility. In the basement of the Valenti mansion, Aria was folding towels when another maid, a girl named Rosa, asked her why she never changed in the staff room like everyone else. "I like having privacy," Aria said, keeping her voice quiet, flat, unmemorable. "You're strange," Rosa said, not unkindly. "You should let yourself exist a little. Come get coffee with us on Saturday. There's a place near the water where—" "I'm tired," Aria interrupted. "I prefer to sleep on Saturdays." Rosa shrugged and walked away. Aria waited until she was certain she was alone, then rushed to the bathroom with the flickering light. She caught her reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. When had her face become this sharp? When had her eyes become this empty? She pulled down the collar of her uniform and saw the edge of a scar visible just above her collarbone, a thin white line running down toward her shoulder. She pulled the fabric up quickly, covering all of it. The scars covered most of her back now. Raised lines from a belt. Pink marks from a cigarette. White lines where the skin had healed badly, a topography of hell mapped across her spine in a language only pain could speak. She had never described them to anyone. She had never even named them. They simply existed, part of her body the way her bones did, the way her blood did. Downstairs, in his office, Luca Valenti walked through a routine. Bruno entered with the security reports. The hallway cameras had been checked. The perimeter was secure. 3 men stood outside in the cold, rotating every 2 hours. Everything was as it should be. As Bruno spoke, Luca paused in the hallway. Through the open library door, he could see Aria dusting the top shelf of books, standing on a small ladder, her movements precise and careful. She was wearing white gloves. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it made the bones of her face stand out like she was made of edges and angles. She seemed to be holding her breath, the way people do when they're trying to disappear. He watched for 5 seconds, maybe less. Then Bruno said something that pulled his attention away, and they continued walking. She was invisible to everyone in that mansion. But what he didn't know was that in 6 months, visibility would become the most dangerous and precious thing in her entire world. The October wind tore through the empty highway like a blade wrapped in ice, and Aria Reynolds stood beside her dead sedan with hands that would not stop shaking. 20 miles outside Seattle, the asphalt stretched in both directions empty and dark, and the car, a 15-year-old Honda with 180,000 miles, had simply stopped breathing somewhere between the exits where no one drove at 3 in the morning. She turned the ignition again. Nothing. Just the soft click of a battery that had already given everything it had. Her phone showed 3% battery, no signal, the screen glowing a cold blue in the darkness. She pulled her thin jacket tighter, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, and checked her wallet with the kind of dread reserved for people who already know what they will find. One $5 bill. That was all. The last money she had in the world, wrinkled and soft from being folded too many times. From her jacket pocket fell something else, a crumpled foreclosure notice with numbers that swam in front of her eyes no matter how many times she read them. $35,000. Due in 14 days. Or the apartment would be gone. Everything would be gone. She had been invisible for 8 years, but invisibility would not protect her from this. Invisibility would not stop the letter, the legal papers, the locked door. She stared at the notice, her breath visible in the bitter air, and heard it before she saw it, the sound of engines, powerful and synchronized, coming from the direction of the city. 3 black SUVs emerged from the darkness like something called into being by the cold itself, and they did not pass by. They slowed. They stopped. Headlights died. Doors opened, and men stepped out first, Bruno and Sal, their hands positioned near their sides, their eyes scanning the empty highway for threats that did not exist. And then Luca Valenti stepped from the middle vehicle, his cashmere coat falling open to reveal a suit that cost more than the first year of rent she had ever paid. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his face carved from something harder than stone. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down toward his cheekbone, thin and precise like someone had once tried to mark him and he had simply decided to keep the mark as a warning. He looked at her standing by her broken car, and something in his expression shifted, so subtle that anyone not watching closely would have missed it entirely. "Miss Reynolds," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that once spoken could never be taken back. "You work in my home." Aria nodded, unable to meet his eyes. In 3 years of cleaning his mansion, she had seen him maybe a dozen times, always at a distance, always moving through spaces she had already finished. He had never spoken to her directly. She had learned to move through his house like a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible. "Yes, Mr. Valenti." "Car trouble." He moved closer, not threatening but not asking permission either. The way powerful men moved through the world as though space itself bent around them. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I'll call a tow truck." The lie came out smooth because she had practiced it, because admitting that she had no one to call and no money for a tow truck meant admitting things that should remain hidden. "I just need to get in the car." It was not a question. "We'll take you home." She looked back at her sedan, then at the 3 black SUVs, then at the men who were watching this exchange the way soldiers watch an officer for clues about what comes next. I don't want to impose, Mr. Valenti. You've already been so. It's 20 degrees out here. His voice had not changed tone, had not softened, but something in the way he said it made her understand that argument would be futile. Get in the car. The door of the middle SUV opened. Aria hesitated for one more second, then climbed into the warm leather interior. The heat washed over her like a prayer answered in an empty church. Luca slid in beside her, and the door closed with the soft sound of expensive German engineering. As the SUV pulled back onto the highway, his eyes found the foreclosure notice still crumpled in her trembling hand. He said nothing about it. He simply watched it, the way one watches something they are deciding whether to touch. At that same hour, in a warehouse on Seattle's South Docks, Douglas Hale counted cash on a steel table while Sophie Langford filed her nails and talked about the charity gala she was hosting next week. Hale was 63, his silver hair slicked back, his expensive suit tailored to hide the soft belly underneath. His hands were the hands of someone who had never worked, never built anything, only taken. Sophie, 45 and sharp as broken glass, wore diamond earrings and a Chanel suit and the kind of smile that made people believe she was their friend right before she destroyed them. They had been partners for 7 years, and in that time they had moved 43 women through their network, collecting debts that could never be paid, taking from the kind of girls who had already lost everything. She hasn't paid in 3 weeks, Sophie said without looking up from her nails. The Reynolds girl. Aria. She owes $35,000 and she's stalling. Hale smiled, and his smile was ice. Then we remind her what happens to girls who stall. Across the city in a different kind of darkness, in a penthouse apartment above Seattle's financial district, Luca Valenti stood at a floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city lights while he made a phone call. Marcus, I need a name checked. Douglas Hale. Everything. Anyone connected to him. I want to know where he sleeps, what he owns, how he owns it, and who pays him. He hung up without waiting for acknowledgement. Bruno, standing in the doorway, had learned long ago not to ask questions when his boss made calls like this. Instead, he simply waited. The answer would come when Luca decided it should. The SUV pulled up to Aria's apartment building at 3:45 in the morning. It was a crumbling structure in a neighborhood where the streetlights had stopped working in 2009, where the windows showed the patched lives of people running out of time. Luca insisted on walking her to her door. Aria wanted to refuse, to thank him quickly, to disappear into her studio and pretend this night had not happened. But she found herself leading him up 3 flights of stairs that smelled like old cooking and desperation, to a door marked 317, which she unlocked with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her apartment was the size of a rich man's closet. Peeling paint the color of old milk. An ancient radiator that clanked and hissed. A mattress on the floor with 2 blankets. A card table with 1 chair. An empty refrigerator visible through the kitchen opening, not just empty, but the kind of empty that shows itself without apology. Stacks of past-due bills on the counter. A jar with coins in it, counted and recounted so many times the lid showed fingerprints from every counting. Luca stood in the center of the room and did not move, did not react, simply observed it the way a general surveys a battlefield. How long? His voice was quiet. How long what? How long have you been living like this? Aria turned away. I manage, Mr. Valenti. Thank you for the ride. Thank you for your kindness. You should go. The notice in your pocket. $35,000 in 2 weeks. She froze. He continued, his voice steady as a knife. I saw it fall when you got out of the car. I'm not blind, Miss Reynolds. I see everything. Who do you owe? She shook her head, backing toward the wall as though distance could create a barrier between them. It's not your concern. I'm nobody. Just a maid who couldn't hold on to her own life. Why would you help me? Luca stepped closer, filling the small space with his presence. Because 3 years ago you started working in my home the same week my brother betrayed our entire family to our enemies. You've cleaned rooms where men discussed killing me. You've heard conversations that could destroy everything I've built. And you've never once repeated a word. Not one. He paused, his scar catching the light. You think I don't notice people who keep secrets? I notice everything, Aria. I notice every person in my world. And I noticed you. She sat on the mattress edge, the words spilling out like blood from a wound that had finally opened. 8 years ago. 16 years old. Parents dead in a car accident. No relatives. Douglas Hale at a youth shelter with promises of work, housing, safety. But the room cost money. The food cost money. The bed cost money. Everything cost money, and suddenly she owed 15,000, then 25, then 40,000. He made her work his network, cleaning houses for wealthy people who looked through her like glass, running errands, doing things that left marks she never named. Sophie Langford, his partner, a socialite who threw charity galas while using her connections to move vulnerable women through Hale's operation. Aria's voice broke at the end. 8 years. He said I'd never be free. I believed him. She stood and turned her back to Luca without asking permission. Her hand shook as she lifted the back of her shirt. The scars covered most of her back, raised lines from a belt, pink marks from cigarettes, white lines where the skin had healed badly, a topography of hell mapped across her spine in a language only pain could speak. She had never described them to anyone. She had never even named them. They simply existed. Luca's face did not change, but his hands curled into fists, knuckles white as bone. I've never told anyone, she whispered, dropping her shirt. There was no one to tell. Outside in the SUV, Bruno checked his watch. Sal shifted in his seat. 15 years working for Luca Valenti. Neither of them had ever seen him stay this long talking to anyone. Bruno leaned toward the window and watched their boss's shadow move past the apartment window. Something had shifted in the world tonight. They could feel it, the way animals feel earthquakes before the ground breaks. Luca made one phone call from her apartment. Marcus. Everything you have. Now. He listened, his jaw tightening with each piece of information. Douglas Hale operated from a warehouse on the South Docks. 12 women currently in his network. 20 years of operation. Federal warrants pending on trafficking charges, but nothing had stuck yet. Sophie Langford's involvement was harder to trace, hidden behind foundations and shell companies and the kind of money that bought silence. When Luca hung up, Aria was sitting on her mattress, staring at nothing. He'll kill me if I run, she said. And Sophie will make sure everyone knows what I am. That I'm dirty. Owned. No one will believe me. Luca crouched in front of her, and for the first time his voice changed into something she had never heard before, something almost gentle. You are not owned. Not anymore. That ends tonight. He left an envelope on her counter without explanation and walked out into the October cold. After he was gone, Aria opened it with shaking hands. $15,000 in cash. A card with a phone number written in black ink. Nothing else. She sat holding the card and the money and understood, in that moment, that some kinds of visibility were more dangerous than any invisibility could ever be. By morning, Douglas Hale had already discovered the cash. He came to her apartment at 7, knocking with his knuckles like a man who owned the door he was knocking on. She answered, and the blood drained from her face. You're late on payment, Aria, he said, stepping inside without invitation. His voice was pleasant, which made it worse. 3 weeks late. That's 35,000 plus penalties. We both know what happens when girls don't pay. He looked around her apartment, taking in the poverty like a connoisseur examines wine. Although someone left you cash. 15,000. Where did you get that? I saved it, she said, the lie thin as tissue paper. He laughed, grabbed her arm, she flinched but did not scream. You've never saved $15 in your entire life. Who gave it to you? Are you working for someone else? That's a breach of contract, sweetheart. He released her with a shove. 2 weeks. 35,000. Or I'm taking it out of your skin. And Sophie has a party that needs servers. Ones who understand their position and don't talk back. He left, and she heard his footsteps descending the stairs before she collapsed against the door. That night, Aria wrote a letter by hand, her shaking handwriting almost illegible. Mr. Valenti, I cannot let you get involved in my problems. Men like Douglas Hale destroy everything they touch, and you have already lost too much in your life. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. That was enough. I am leaving Seattle tonight. Please do not look for me. Aria. She folded it carefully, addressed it to the mansion, and placed it in her coat pocket. She packed a backpack with her few belongings, the $5 she had left, and walked out into the October cold without looking back. She did not know that Emma Valenti, Luca's beloved sister, 7 years old and blind since birth, was about to be the reason her letter would never be delivered. She did not know that within 48 hours she would be running through an underground parking garage with bullets tearing through the air around her. She did not know that she would stand in front of a blind child and a powerful man and understand, in that final moment, that some kinds of visibility are worth dying for. The October wind tore through the parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice, carrying with it the smell of exhaust and dead leaves. Aria Reynolds sat in her car, a 2009 Honda Civic with a broken passenger window sealed shut with duct tape and prayer, and stared at the 5 crumpled dollar bills in her palm. $5. That was the entire universe of her wealth now. 2 days without eating had made her lightheaded, her vision swimming at the edges, but the hunger had become almost familiar, like an old companion she had learned to ignore. The convenience store glowed 20 feet away across the asphalt. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed against the darkness. She could spend $4 on a single meal, instant ramen and a bottle of water, and still have $1 left. Or she could spend all 5 on gas and drive another hour north, put more distance between herself and Seattle, between herself and Douglas Hale. The thought of his voice on the phone 3 days ago still made her stomach clench. $35,000. 2 weeks. Or he would take payment from her skin. She closed her eyes. Her dead phone sat in the cup holder, useless, a black rectangle that hadn't held a charge in 48 hours. No one was looking for her. No one even knew she was gone except the people who wanted her gone permanently. Emma Valenti had asked about her yesterday at the mansion. Aria had heard from one of the other staff, but that question meant nothing. Children forgot quickly. The world moved on. Invisible people simply ceased to exist once they stepped out of frame. The tap on the window came so suddenly that Aria's entire body jerked. A child's face pressed against the glass. 7 years old, maybe 8. Dark curls framing pale cheeks. Eyes that didn't quite focus, clouded like old milk. The little girl wore a pink coat the color of Easter, pristine and expensive, and held a white cane in one small hand. Aria's chest stopped moving. "Excuse me," the child's voice came through the crack in the window, high and bell-like. "Can you help me? I'm lost." Aria opened the door slowly, and the girl's head tilted, tracking her movement by sound. "Emma?" "Emma Valenti." The words felt impossible in Aria's mouth. "What are you doing here?" "Miss Aria from the house." Emma's face brightened. "I was with my brother's men, but I heard a puppy crying and I followed the sound and now I don't know where they are." The words tumbled out, innocent and matter-of-fact, as if a 7-year-old blind girl wandering alone into an abandoned parking lot was a normal Wednesday. Aria stepped fully out of the car, fingers already reaching for Emma's small hand. "Come here. It's cold. Come." The black van screeched into the lot at 50 miles per hour. 4 men exploded from the doors before it fully stopped rolling. Aria's brain catalogued them in one terrified second, the way they moved, the way they scanned the lot, the professional efficiency of their spreading formation. She recognized the lead man. Tommy Castellano. She had seen him once at a warehouse party, heard his name whispered with fear among Luca's men. They weren't here for her. They were here for Emma. Aria didn't think. Thinking was a luxury invisible girls couldn't afford. She grabbed Emma's hand and yanked her behind the nearest dumpster, pulling the child down behind rusted metal that smelled like rotting food and chemicals. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, her voice steady despite her heart trying to claw out of her ribs. "I've got you." Emma's small fingers gripped Aria's jacket sleeve. She didn't cry. Her breathing came in controlled little gasps, the breathing of a child who had learned from birth that the world wasn't always safe. "Where's my brother?" Emma whispered. "Sure. It's okay. Stay very still." The men's voices carried across the lot, harsh and impatient. "Fan out. She's here." "The girl. Check every vehicle." Aria pulled Emma closer, the child's back pressed against Aria's chest, and Aria became a shield. A thin, starving, scarred shield. Her empty stomach cramped. October cold bit through every layer of her clothes, a sweater with a hole in the seam, a jacket from a Goodwill bin 3 years ago. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago. Adrenaline made everything sharp and distant at the same time, like watching her own terror from behind reinforced glass. One of the men walked directly toward their position. His boots crunched on gravel. Once, twice, 3 times. Each step sounded like a countdown. Aria's mind spiraled down a familiar path. She had nothing. No weapon. No phone. No backup. No right to exist in any space that mattered. She was nobody. Douglas Hale had spent 8 years teaching her that truth, and now it was about to kill her anyway. Emma could have better protection. Emma deserved someone who wasn't broken, someone who wasn't disposable, someone who hadn't been marked for debt and destruction. Aria should release her grip, push Emma forward toward the vehicle they might miss, and run the other direction into the darkness. Disappear like she had planned. No one would blame her. No one would even know. Her hand moved toward the dumpster's edge. "You won't leave me, right?" Emma's whisper, impossibly small. "You saved me in the poker room." Aria's hand stopped mid-motion. 3 years ago. An evening when Emma had wandered into the underground rooms where Luca met with his men, where cards and cash spread across green felt tables, where violence hummed beneath the ceiling like electricity. Emma had toddled in, blind and curious, and one of the guards had laughed, uncertain whether to stop her. But Aria, invisible in her black and white uniform, had seen the confusion on the child's face. She had scooped Emma up, carried her upstairs, sat with her in the kitchen for 20 minutes telling her a story about a princess who could hear magic that no one else could hear. Emma remembered. Someone remembered Aria existed. Aria's jaw set. She pulled Emma closer, wrapped both arms around the girl, and made a decision that rewrote everything. If these men wanted this child, they would have to go through her first. And Aria Reynolds, invisible nobody, would not move. The boot stopped directly beside the dumpster. "Come on out," the man called out, voice carrying cruel amusement. "We know you're here." Aria stood, pushing Emma completely behind her, arms spread wide to shield the child's entire body. Her voice came out steady, a miracle, because nothing inside her was steady. "You can't have her." The lead man laughed. A sound like breaking glass. "You're that maid. The one Hale owns. Move or we'll move you." "No." He pulled a gun. 2 more men did the same, and suddenly the parking lot was a triangle of black metal and death aimed at her chest. Aria didn't budge. She spread her arms wider, making herself a larger target, making herself impossible to miss. The first crack of gunfire split the night. The bullet punched into her left shoulder, spinning her sideways, fire exploding through her body. She staggered but stayed upright, her body still between the guns and Emma. The second shot hit her right side, below the ribs, a white-hot explosion of pain that stole her breath. She dropped to one knee but caught herself, still facing them, still shielding. The third and fourth bullets came in rapid succession, her chest, her stomach, and she fell forward, her body collapsing completely over Emma, covering the child like a human shield. Blood pooled on the asphalt, mixing with dead leaves that skittered in the bitter wind. The fifth bullet tore through her thigh. The sixth through her hip. Pain had become the entire universe, white noise drowning out everything except one thought: Emma was alive. The seventh bullet grazed her neck as darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Emma screamed. The men moved forward to grab the girl. Then headlights, a dozen of them, flooded the parking lot in white light so bright it turned night into day. The black convoy. Luca's men. 12 of them in tactical gear that seemed to materialize from nowhere, moving like ghosts, moving like death itself had been given a physical form and a single purpose. Bruno was first, then Sal, brutal and efficient. The Castelliano men had seconds, maybe 5, before their guns clattered useless to the asphalt. A wrist shattered. A kneecap destroyed. The lead gunman collapsed, trembling like a cornered animal, begging. "Please, Valenti, we didn't know she was important, we thought she was just a maid." Luca Valenti emerged last from the darkness, moving through his men like he moved through air, like they were nothing but obstacles he had already moved past 1,000 times. He saw Aria's body covering his sister. He saw the blood. He saw the 7 bullet holes. His face became something that was no longer entirely human. "She took 7 bullets for my sister," his voice came out dead calm, which was infinitely more terrifying than rage. 7. She is not just anything. He didn't kill them. Death would be too quick, too merciful. He made one phone call, and within minutes another convoy arrived. The men were dragged away screaming into a fate worse than death, disappeared into the kind of darkness where screams don't reach the outside world. Then Luca knelt beside Aria's body. She was barely conscious, blood everywhere, breath rattling like wind through a broken window. Emma sobbed, "Is Miss Aria dead? Please don't let her be dead." Luca gently moved Aria enough to pull Emma free, handed his sister to Bruno with hands that were shaking. "Get her to the safe house. Everyone." Then he lifted Aria himself, carried her to the SUV, and held her against his chest as medics rushed forward with equipment and urgency. She whispered through blood-frothed lips, "The letter. My pocket. I was leaving." He found it as they worked on her, read the first line in the vehicle's dim light while paramedics cut away her clothes. Your name in her handwriting. His name. A farewell from someone who had decided she was not worth saving. Something in his face broke completely. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered to her unconscious face. "You understand me?" "Nowhere." The hospital fluorescent lights hummed with the indifferent brightness of emergency rooms everywhere. Aria had been in surgery for 4 hours and 18 minutes, not that Luca was counting, except he was, every single second, a weight in his chest. He sat in the waiting room with her letter unfolded in his hands, reading the same words over and over like they might change, like the story might rewrite itself if he read it enough times. Bruno approached, his face grim but not defeated. "She's going to make it. 7 bullets, and she's going to make it." He paused. "The doctor says she's stronger than she should be." Luca didn't respond. He folded the letter carefully, precisely, like it was made of glass. Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford. The warehouse on Dock 9. They heard what happened. They're trying to run. They're not running anywhere. Luca stood, pocketed the letter against his heart. Not anymore. By dawn, it was finished. Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford were arrested at a federal checkpoint outside the city limits, their vehicle surrounded by FBI agents with guns drawn. The evidence was comprehensive: bank records, victim statements, photographs, audio recordings from confidential informants. 20 years of trafficking. 12 current victims. 8 years with Aria Reynolds listed in his personal ledger as if she were an asset, a possession, a debt that could be extracted in skin and blood. The media explosion arrived like a tsunami. Sophie Langford's face plastered across every news channel, the socialite, the philanthropist, the charity board member who had hosted galas while running a trafficking operation. Her financial account seized. Her social circle severing ties in real time as text messages and emails revealed the scope of her knowledge and participation. Total destruction. Complete and systematic erasure of everything she had built. Douglas Hale faced 40 years minimum in federal prison. All assets seized. Every single victim coming forward now that he was in custody, now that the fear had a face and that face was terrified and powerless. The empire of pain he had constructed over 2 decades crumbled into dust overnight. 3 days after the shooting, Aria opened her eyes. The hospital room was white and quiet and filled with machines that beeped in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her body was a geography of bandages and pain, but she was breathing. The 7 bullets had not found anything that couldn't heal. And at the foot of her bed sat Luca Valenti, asleep in a chair that was far too small for his frame, her letter still clutched in his hand. When he woke and saw her eyes open, something shifted in the universe. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The hospital room was white and still, machines beeping in rhythm with her breathing. 7 days had passed since the bullets. 7 days of bandages and morphine and the weight of gravity pulling her back into the mattress. Aria Reynolds lay in the bed with her eyes finally open, watching dust particles float through the afternoon light filtering between the blinds. Her body was a geography of pain, shoulders, ribs, abdomen, legs, each breath a reminder of what happened, of Emma's screams, of the choice she made without thinking. At the foot of the bed, Luca Valenti sat in a chair meant for visiting families. He hadn't left in 5 days. The same black suit, now creased and heavy with exhaustion, hung on his frame. His dark eyes were hollow in a way that frightened her more than anything else. A man like him didn't show exhaustion. A man like him didn't show anything. The crumpled letter was still in his hand, the paper stained with blood that might have been hers, might have been his. He'd been holding it for days, reading the words she'd written before she tried to disappear. Aria tried to move and gasped, her body screaming in protest. Her hand found the bed rail. "Don't," Luca said. His voice was rough like gravel, like he hadn't spoken in days. She froze. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. In 3 years of working in his mansion, she'd never been close enough to see the faint scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale against his olive skin. "Emma." Aria's voice came out as a whisper, hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed 2 days ago. "Safe. Unharmed. Because of you." He paused. "She's been sitting outside this room every day asking when you'll wake up. She has a stack of drawings. One for each day you were asleep." Aria's eyes filled with tears. She'd tried to think about Emma while lying here, tried to picture the child's face, but her mind kept sliding backward into the parking garage, into the moment she'd moved without calculating odds or chances. Just moved. Like her body had made the decision her mind couldn't afford to make. "I tried to leave," Aria said. "I wrote you a letter. I was going to disappear so my problems wouldn't touch you. Your sister. Emma." She couldn't finish. The tears came instead, and it hurt, everything hurt, but she couldn't stop. Luca's hand moved to the bedside table. He pulled the letter from his pocket, the one she'd written at 3 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, trying to find words that would make him understand. Trying to make her absence make sense. The paper was crumpled, stained, folded, and unfolded 100 times. "You said I'd already lost too much," he read, his voice barely audible. "That men like Hale destroy everything they touch. That your presence would be a target on my back." He looked at her. "You said you were grateful for 3 years of work, 3 years of safety, and that you were sorry you couldn't give more." Aria turned her face away. She couldn't bear to see his expression. "I know what you did," he continued. "I read every word. And then I found you on the highway with $5 in your pocket and a foreclosure notice that said you had 2 weeks before they took everything." His voice roughened. "You took 7 bullets for my sister. Nobody in my organization, men I've known for 15, 20 years, would have done what you did. You didn't think about yourself for 1 second. You thought about a blind girl you barely knew. Aria closed her eyes. Open your eyes, Luca said. It wasn't a command. It was a request. She opened them and looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw something there she'd never seen in another living person, someone who saw her scars and didn't look away. Someone who didn't flinch. You're not nobody, he said. You're not nobody to Emma. You're not nobody to me. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor, the soft hiss of oxygen, the sound of Seattle traffic far below outside the hospital window. Hale and Sophie? Aria asked. Federal prison. Both of them. Hale faces 40 years minimum. All his assets seized. Sophie's entire social circle collapsed in real time. The media found out everything, the trafficking ring, the victims, the bank accounts. She's finished. Everything she built is gone. Aria's hands trembled. The debt. The foreclosure notice. $35,000 in 2 weeks. Paid, Luca said. I paid it the day I found you on the highway. Your apartment building, the one with the violations they were using against you. I bought it. Fixed everything. Reduced everyone's rent by half. Your apartment is yours. Free. As long as you want it. Why? Aria's voice broke. Why would you do all of this? You barely know me. I'm just someone who worked in your house. 3 years ago, Luca interrupted, my brother Marco betrayed our family to our enemies. He was angry, broken, jealous. I had to choose between mercy and survival. He paused, and his hand tightened into a fist. I chose survival. I killed my own brother. His voice cracked slightly. I thought I was dead inside after that. I thought I'd never feel anything again. I built an empire on that emptiness, on control, on the belief that power meant not needing anyone, not caring about anyone. He looked at her. Then I watched you shield a child you barely knew with your own body. I watched you take 7 bullets and stay standing until you knew she was safe. And something in me, something I thought was dead, woke up. His voice dropped. You showed me what real strength looks like, Aria. It's not about power or money or control. It looks like a woman with $5 in her pocket choosing someone else's life over her own. Aria couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Could only stare at him while her heart did something that had nothing to do with the trauma and everything to do with the man sitting at the foot of her bed. Let me save you back, he said. That's all I'm asking. The door opened quietly. Bruno appeared, his massive frame nearly filling the doorway, and behind him was Emma. The girl's blonde hair was braided, her small hands extended in front of her as she navigated the room, counting steps the way she'd learned to do. Miss Aria. You're awake. Emma ran to the bed, careful not to jostle Aria's body, and her small fingers found Aria's face, reading her features like Braille. You're the bravest person I know. Braver than all of Luca's scary men. Aria laughed, then gasped at the pain. I'm not brave, sweetheart. I just... Yes, you are. Emma's expression was serious, wise beyond 7 years. Brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway. My teacher told me that. Outside the room, Bruno leaned against the wall and caught Sal's eye. They exchanged a look that spoke of 15 years of service, of watching their boss transform from a man made of stone into something that resembled a human being. I've never seen him like this, Bruno whispered. A week later, Aria stood in an apartment that belonged to her. Really belonged to her. The foreclosure notice was gone, replaced with a deed in her name, typed and notarized and real. On the kitchen counter sat a check for $100,000 and a handwritten note, for whatever future you want. No debt. No obligation. Your choice. L. She was still holding the check when her phone rang. A new phone Luca had delivered with one number programmed in. His voice came through steady and careful. "There's a job at my company if you want it. Marketing department, normal hours, real salary. Or if you want to go to college, I'll handle tuition. Or if you want to leave Seattle entirely, I'll arrange it. Whatever you want, Aria. It's your life now." She was crying again, couldn't stop. "I don't know what to do with freedom. I've never had it." "Then figure it out. Take your time. You have all the time in the world now." A pause. "But I hope you stay." The line stayed open. Neither of them hung up. They breathed together across the distance, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage. 6 months later, cherry blossoms fell outside the Valenti Company building like pink snow. Aria walked through the lobby in professional clothes, carrying a tablet, her head held high. Co-workers greeted her by name. She smiled back, genuine, unafraid. In the break room, Emma sat at the table doing homework while Aria helped her navigate an assignment about poetry. The girl was 8 now, her confidence growing with each passing day. Luca appeared in the doorway and stopped. He watched them for a moment, his sister and the woman who'd saved her life and somehow, without either of them planning it, become family. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect, the moment seemed to whisper. Sometimes salvation looks like a woman with $5 and a heart too big for the broken world around her. Aria took 7 bullets for a child she barely knew. In doing so, she saved more than Emma Valenti. She saved a man who thought he was dead inside. She saved 12 women from a trafficking ring. She saved herself from a life of invisible suffering. The scars on her back will never fully fade, but they no longer define her. As evening light caught them walking out of the building together, Emma between them holding both their hands, Aria touched the bracelet on her wrist, bead spelling brave, made by Emma's small hands. She smiled and walked forward into her new life. One hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. If this story moved you, don't just watch and leave. Hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to remember that one act of courage can change everything. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will restore your faith in humanity. Drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest. You're not invisible. Someone sees you. Your life matters more than you know.